I'm Shannon Martin. Tonight we're learning new details about that deadly police shooting of an armed man near a Scarborough school.
It was surreal. It's hard to believe it was actually happening.
It was terrifying.
We have professional support services staff on site at all 5 impacted schools.
Investigators now say a pellet gun was recovered at the scene. We're also learning more about how students and the school responded. Plus,
of course, it was not the right decision. It was the wrong decision, period.
A stunning development in Texas. Believing no children were at risk, the officer in charge during the elementary school massacre kept police from moving in on the shooter. And
people that bought maybe a couple of months ago that paid a higher amount than in today's market are worried, if they overpaid.
The GTA's hot housing market is starting to cool. Why that has some buyers rethinking their decision. Thanks for joining us. Investigators recovered a pellet gun at the scene of the officer-involved shooting in Scarborough. You saw it first here yesterday. Around 1 p.m., there were several 911 calls that a man carrying a rifle was near the school. Well, soon after, police arrived on scene and shot and killed the man. Now the Special Investigations Unit is looking into their actions. Chris Glover with our top story tonight.
Gratitude and grief at Scarborough's William Davis School today.
Thank you for protecting us.
It didn't sink in until the evening. That's when it became really upsetting. But they're all okay.
Yesterday, several nearby schools flew into lockdown after police received reports around 1 p.m. of a man carrying a rifle.
Never so happy to see my kids.
Parent Ronnie Smith says with the mass shooting this week at a Texas school, many, possibly even the police, were on edge.
There's a lot of fear on law enforcement side that this could be that.
Today, a clearer timeline of what happened. Police found the man around 1:20. 2 officers discharged their guns, and he was pronounced dead around 1:40.
I don't believe there was an exchange of gunfire.
Last night, the police watchdog investigating the circumstances said a firearm was located near the dead man.
I can confirm that the weapon that was recovered on the scene, I mentioned it yesterday, that is a pellet gun.
Pellet guns can in fact be quite dangerous.
This criminologist says de-escalation efforts will be scrutinized in the SIU's investigation, but the massacre in Texas should be factored in.
Police have a protocol for responding after major incidents because there is a higher risk of copycat incidents, including in Canada.
The SIU says the family of the 27-year-old man who was killed has not consented to releasing his name. Meanwhile, the school is being applauded today by some parents.
I felt the school did a really good job. I mean, they sent us a lot of notifications, and the kids seemed pretty happy. They said they just played under their desk.
The TDSB says each school conducts 2 lockdown drills a year. Those were paused during COVID, so at least one school in East York is telling parents because of what happened yesterday, they'll be practicing a lockdown drill next week.
Strangely enough, it was really powerful how the whole community came to pick up their kids, and everybody was hugging, and just it was a very emotional time.
Officials say support staff will be on hand at 5 nearby schools for as long as it's needed. Chris Glover, CBC News, Toronto.
Okay, let's head south of the border now to Texas. Tonight there is a number of stunning new details to tell you about around the police response to the mass shooting at the elementary school. Officials now say that about 20 officers waited inside the school for a tactical squad for about 45 minutes. Our Magda Gebrselassie has been in Texas covering this story for us. She has more on why officers waited.
Of course, it was not the right decision. It was the wrong decision, period. There's no excuse for that.
A shocking admission by police. They made the wrong call for over an hour. Today, we were told this was why police didn't quickly enter the classrooms where the shooter was.
The on-scene commander at the time believed that it had transitioned from an active shooter to a barricaded subject. There was time to retrieve the keys and wait for a tactical team with the equipment to go ahead and breach the door and take on the subject at that point.
Meanwhile, 911 calls were being made inside the rooms, letting the dispatchers know kids were still alive and asking for police to come. Victims have been saying all along that police were too slow to act. Parents were outside the school that day begging officers to go in.
I told one of the officers myself, if they didn't want to go in there. Let me borrow a gun and a vest, and I'll go in there myself to handle it.
How this was handled is now being looked into. As for those who made the 911 calls, they survived, but 19 students and 2 teachers didn't. Many are now wondering if police had made the right call, could it have changed all of that? Magda Gebrselassie, CBC News, Uvalde.
So meanwhile, 500 kilometers east in Houston, Texas, the National Rifle Association's annual convention is now underway. Hundreds of protesters are also there.
Gun owners that are in there that don't necessarily agree with everything the NRA says, you need to understand that you are complicit in this if you are not speaking out against them.
But many would still tell us that the evil on display in Uvalde or in Buffalo derives from the presence of guns in the hands of ordinary American citizens. It's far easier to slander one's political adversaries and to demand that responsible citizens forfeit their constitutional rights than it is to examine the cultural sickness giving birth to unspeakable acts of evil.
Also speaking tonight, former U.S. President Donald Trump. NRA leaders continue to reject stricter gun laws and are calling for better mental health care. The mayor of Houston saying there was no way to cancel the massive 3-day convention without the city being hit with a number of lawsuits. Well, closer to home next, a sentencing hearing began today for the man convicted in the murder of Toronto rapper Smoke Dogg and his brand manager. Abdul Qadir Handul was found guilty of second-degree murder. Today, family and friends of the victims shared their immense grief with the court. Our Farah Morelli was there.
It has been an emotional day here at Superior Court as victim impact statements were read aloud, some by the Crown, others by friends and family who were here today. Now, it was back in February that 26-year-old Abdul Qadir Handul was convicted for the 2018 daylight killing of Javante Smart, also known as Smoke Dogg, and his brand manager Ernest Madekwe. It unfolded on a busy strip of Queen West. As shots rang out, crowds scrambled. The chaos captured on surveillance video. During the trial, detectives identified the man in white here as Handul, picking up a black object, then running after Smart and Madekwe. One of the most intense moments of today's hearing was no doubt Pamela Bent, the mother of Javante Smart, reading her victim impact statement through heavy tears and sobs. She said, quote, "My justice is bringing my son back to me. That will never happen. Instead, I got a life sentence I have to deal with until I die. Javante had so much to live for. He didn't get the chance to take his baby girl to school on her first day. My heart bleeds to know my granddaughter will never get that chance to do all the things a child would do with her father." Also in court, Ernest Madekwe's family. Through the Crown, his father said, quote, "We miss his kindness and charming smiles in all our daily family activities. Mr. Handul will never know how much time we spent each day crying, even after 3 years since he mercilessly and wickedly murdered our beloved Ernest. The bullets that Mr. Handul pumped into his body not only killed him, but also blew gaping holes through our hearts." Now, at the end of today's proceedings, Handul stood up in court and read a brief statement out loud saying, quote, "I'm very sorry for my actions." He told the judge, "I am more than what I did that day," and said all he wants to do is get out and be with his family and further his education. Now, the mandatory minimum sentence for Handul is life in prison with no chance of parole for 10 years. But today, the Crown asked for no parole eligibility for 20 years. Meanwhile, Handul's lawyer suggested 15 years is more appropriate, saying that he's a young black man from a marginalized neighborhood with no criminal record before this. Sentencing submissions will continue in July. Farah Morelli, CBC News, Toronto.
Meantime, the testimony is now over at the sex assault trial for the former lead singer of Headley. In court today, the lawyer for Jacob Hogard gave closing arguments. He's pleaded not guilty to all charges. Ellen Morrow has our story.
After a trial marked by harrowing testimony, Jacob Hogard's case will soon be in the hands of the jury. Today, defense counsel Megan Savard had one last try to convince them her client is not guilty. She said the allegations by 2 women of violent rape are fabrications. Their accounts are just inconsistent and implausible, said Savard. The encounters were fully consensual, entirely within the bounds of the law. The women, who don't know each other, say Hogarth repeatedly raped them in the fall of 2016 at 2 Toronto area hotels after they agreed to spend time with him. The women testified Hogarth acted like a psychopath and a monster during the alleged attacks. One of the women was 16 at the time. Hogarth is also accused of sexually touching her when she was 15, before the age of consent. Hogarth, who was the frontman of the popular Canadian band Headley, has pleaded not guilty to all the charges. His defense acknowledged Hogarth was cavalier towards women and their feelings, arguing the accusers in this case felt dismissed by him after they had sex and, in their frustration, spun their accounts into extravagant false stories. Crown attorney Jill Witkin, in her closing arguments, reminded the jury of the women's emotional testimony. They say the alleged attacks left them bleeding with deep emotional trauma. She was gagging and crying. He told her, "This is what you deserve, you dirty whore." She told him to stop. She told him no. Until this day, she cannot sleep without a light. She suffers from nightmares and panic attacks. The jury is set to be sequestered starting Tuesday to deliberate Hogarth's fate. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Toronto.
A major story coming out of the Supreme Court of Canada. It has ruled in the 2017 case of the Quebec City mosque shooter. The top court says Alexandre Bissonnette has the constitutional right to apply for parole after 25 years. Now, this upholds an earlier Quebec Court of Appeal ruling. In 2017, he killed 6 people. He was originally sentenced to life without the chance of parole for 40 years. Experts say today's decision could have implications on criminal sentencing right across the country. Changing gears to talk about the forecast. Friday, heading into the weekend. Nick, I felt like it was super muggy, but I've been inside for a long time, I will admit.
Yes, I know. Tell me about it. Actually, we started to see that humidity build in more so. And even though the temperatures themselves were only at 23 at their best this afternoon, the Humidex making it feel closer to 30. Now, currently, we're sitting at 22 degrees in the city of Toronto, similar temperatures elsewhere. You factor in the humidity, though, and we've got Humidex values that are close to the 30 mark. Now, this is actually going to come down as we move through the evening tonight, and this as a cold front is sort of pushed through. So we'll drag in some drier air over the next 12 hours or so. We are looking at thunderstorms to the north, though. A little bit of instability, so we've had some hints of sunshine there, and that's triggered off some thunderstorms, at least assisted in triggering off some thunderstorms and some showers. You're starting to see that right across the north edge of the GTA, kind of along Highway 9, slowly shifting southward here. Now, as it does, the north end of the city likely to get hit the most with this rainfall, but it will slowly kind of shift its way toward the lake. It is a fairly slow-moving system, so some areas are going to see more rain than others as it continues. As we move through tomorrow morning, though, we're looking at sunshine returning, and then we've got sunny skies for the next few. You can also expect to see some warming temperatures. Tomorrow, 22 degrees and drier conditions. Not much to speak of in terms of a humidex, but that changes into the beginning of next week. We'll have your full forecast coming up in just a bit.
Thanks, Nick. We'll see you soon.
You bet.
We all know how much the pandemic affected life in Ontario over the past 2 years, yet for many voters, other concerns are more front of mind right now. Still, the pandemic does factor into the election race, just not as you might expect. Queen's Park reporter Mike Crawley explains.
You might have thought that a pandemic that infected millions in Ontario, shut down businesses, and closed schools for months on end would totally dominate the provincial election campaign. But you'd be wrong. Ask voters around Ontario what issues are most important to them. You don't often hear COVID.
The prices of groceries and stuff like that. Environment stuff, climate stuff.
The gas prices. I would like to see that investment made in public transit.
Part of what's at play? Call it COVID voter fatigue. After 2+ years largely defined by the pandemic, many people simply don't want to engage on it anymore.
COVID no longer feels like an emergency to a lot of Ontarians.
It's not that the pandemic isn't a factor in how people will vote. It's more that people's opinions of how the Ford government managed it are pretty firmly entrenched.
What people think about how COVID was handled, that's already baked into the political spectrum. It's already baked into where you're going to sit as a voter.
What that means for Liberal leader Stephen Del Duca and NDP leader Andrea Horwath is there's a limit to how many voters they can woo away from Doug Ford's PCs on pandemic matters.
Doug Ford basically lied about putting an iron ring around long-term care. He did the opposite.
Throughout this pandemic, when Doug Ford as Premier had the chance to be on their side, all he dished out were empty words, empty rhetoric, while he continued to be on the side of big box retail and giant corporations.
There's also polling evidence that Ford's performance during the pandemic is the very reason why certain voters are backing the PCs.
That's where the Tory lead is coming from, which is ironic because in the last election, the Tories won despite Doug Ford. In this election, if they win, they're going to win because of Doug Ford.
I found Doug Ford did pretty good throughout the pandemic.
Asked today if there's anything he should have done differently about COVID, Ford doesn't bite.
You're asking me to point to one thing. I can't. You know, I'll tell you one thing. I was the first to stand up there, and if I made a mistake, I think I'm the only elected official, politician, whatever you want to call us, that would go up there and say, you know, I made a mistake, I apologize, this is what we're doing to correct it, and I corrected it immediately within 24 hours. Thank you.
While plenty of voters are dissatisfied with Ford's handling of the pandemic, there may be enough who think otherwise to give him a second term. Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.
Under provincial legislation, Ontario is supposed to be fully accessible to those with disabilities by 2025, but advocates say they've seen no improvements over the past 4 years under Doug Ford's leadership. Now they're turning to Ontario's other parties to find out what steps they would take if elected. Joanne Quinello has the story.
Like most people, Danielle Kane thought Ontario was pretty accessible. But that was before a gunman killed 2 people and injured 13 on the Danforth in 2018. Kane was one of them. She uses a wheelchair now and has very different thoughts about accessibility.
Whether like snow on the ground, snow not being cleared or ice not being cleared, or you know, the lack of elevators in certain buildings or transit points, or if there is an elevator, does that elevator work? Or if there is an accessible door, does the button even work? Like there's so many factors.
Kane lives across the street from a park, but because there's no curb cut, she has to go a long way around. It's a small thing, she says, but something people without disabilities don't think about. A bigger thing, she had to have painful surgery because most accessible washrooms weren't for her.
I actually did need to have surgery to create a urinary stoma in order for me to pee like a regular girl in a stall and use like the kind of facilities that I used to be able to use before. So that was a massive shock to me, and it really restricted my what I could do in the day.
In this election, advocates want to know what the main political parties would do to, if not make Ontario fully accessible by 2025, at least make major improvements to accessibility. One key advocacy group sent the parties a detailed questionnaire, but they didn't hear back from everyone.
Premier Ford is the first Conservative leader in almost 2 decades, indeed the first leader of any major political party in almost 2 decades, who's refused to even answer our request for election commitments, and throughout his entire term as Premier, refused to even meet us.
The NDP and Green Party have made the most specific pledges in their platforms. They've promised to set accessibility standards for education, healthcare, and change the building code. The Liberal platform doesn't mention accessibility, but in answering the Alliance's questionnaire, the party promised to consult with people with disabilities and come up with a plan within the first year of taking office. Joanne Quinello.
Welcome back. Russian forces have an eastern Ukrainian city all but surrounded, part of a big push in the region over the last couple of weeks. As Salima Shivji shows us, they have left a path of destruction behind.
After weeks of constant shelling, this is what life is like in Popozna, in the Donbas region under Russian occupation. Once a town of 20,000 people, much of it is now in ruins. Natalia Kovalenko is one of the few still here. Her home hit, the balcony gone. 2 of my neighbors died out there when a shell came flying in. 8 others were wounded, she says. We were tired of being scared all the time. Popozna is now firmly in Russian hands, a base from which its troops advance in an all-out assault on the rest of the region. trying to cut off crucial supply lines and block the road to the key cities of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. A brutal attack, Ukraine's president says.
The current offensive of the occupiers in Donbass will make the region uninhabited. They want to burn our towns and cities to ashes. All this, including the deportation of our people and the mass killings of civilians, is an obvious policy of genocide pursued by Russia.
A charge backed up by a new independent analysis signed by 30 leading genocide experts who warn there is enough evidence indicating Russia is intent on destroying the Ukrainian people. Ukraine's military knows it's outnumbered and outgunned in the Donbass, its forces struggling against the type of weapons Russia has. Canada has donated some of its M777 howitzers, as have the United States and Australia. But Ukraine is pleading for multiple launch rocket systems. A far more powerful weapon that they say is urgently needed, the only way to push back the Russians in the east. Reports are the U.S. is preparing to send some. An announcement could come as early as next week. Salima Shivji, CBC News.
Some of the sizzle is now gone from the GTA housing market. Prices have been falling for the past couple of months. That's left some buyers feeling buyer's remorse, and that's got them rethinking their purchase altogether. Philip de Monti has our story.
Rising interest rates poured cold water on the red-hot real estate market across the country. As prices dip, some buyers regret purchasing at the peak.
People that bought maybe a couple of months ago that paid a higher amount in today's market are worried, if they overpaid. I know a few lawyers that have had clients request to pull out of this contract.
Canadian home prices reached a record high in February, averaging at more than $816,000. They've now dropped for 2 months in a row. In Toronto, prices are down by about $80,000 on average since that peak. This real estate lawyer says more of his firm's clients than ever before want to cancel their home purchase.
We have gone from 1% of our deals to probably 5 to 7% of our deals where people are worried about people walking away and where there are concerns.
Pulling out isn't easy, however.
The buyer's really in a bit of a jam legally. But there are options available for buyers who are in.
For one, they can negotiate with the seller to try to get what's called a mutual release of their deposit. But in many provinces, sellers have the upper hand.
Legally, they are entitled to keep the entirety of the deposit and even more if they suffer damages of any kind, which currently the fact that the market has slowed is a damage that they can claim.
If no settlement is reached, it could end up in court, which could take years and cost a lot to both parties.
It's so sudden, this turn in the market, that some people made the choice to purchase without having sold first. And so it's a domino effect that can happen in certain circumstances.
Despite the market cooling down, there's still a serious lack of supply and many well-financed buyers eager to get in. Some experts predict the market will bounce back in the coming months. Philippe Damonski, CBC News, Toronto.
A group of landlords is calling for faster resolutions to rental disputes. They staged a protest today outside the Landlord and Tenant Board. They say backlogs are forcing some to wait for months and in some cases up to a year for a hearing. Natalie Collada has more.
In a city with sky-high rent and where the cost of everything keeps rising, these landlords are fed up.
Fix the LTB! Fix the LTB!
Basically, anyone who wants to file an application at the board, they're left waiting months, sometimes closer to a year, just to get inside this building.
The group says hearing delays and backlogs for evictions for unpaid rent are costing them their livelihoods.
People are selling their homes for this. People are getting second jobs for this. People are taking out lines of credits and second mortgages on their property just to help make ends meet.
Among the changes the group is asking for, speeding up the hearing process, including ensuring eviction hearings are held within a month of filing a complaint.
It should be a streamlined process for eviction for non-payment of rent without a lot of stays. If someone doesn't pay, the landlord should be able to get them out within 2 or 3 months.
The suggestion that reducing tenant protections is the answer to speed it up
really fails to look at what we had only a couple of years ago.
Tenant advocates say hearing delays worsened when much of the process at the LTB went digital.
In 2017 and 2018, Tribunals Ontario's annual report said that over 50% of applications filed with the Landlord-Tenant Board met their 25-day standard period in terms of issuing a hearing for it. It's gradually decreased since that time, where in their last report, 2020 and 2021, they only met that standard 1% of the time.
In a statement to CBC, Tribunals Ontario says applications are being scheduled between 3 and 7 months, and it recognizes current processing times are longer than we wish them to be, and we understand the impact that delays have on those who access our services. We are actively working to improve our service standards and to modernize our operations to provide more timely and effective services to our users. Natalie Collada, CBC News, Toronto.
The organization that administers standardized tests for Ontario students says it's paused testing while it resolves a technical issue. Now is the time when kids in grades 3 and 6 are supposed to be completing reading, writing, and math assessments, but the Education Quality and Accountability Office, better known as EQAO, says the problem is slowing the system for some users. The organization says it's working as quickly as possible to resolve the issue. Well, parents may have noticed this one. If you've been looking for children's Tylenol lately, some stores are in short supply. Renee Filippone finds out why and looks at alternate options for parents in a pinch.
It's a common sight in pharmacies across the country, near empty shelves of children's cold and flu medicine and specifically Tylenol products. It's what these parents normally reach for when their kids are under the weather.
I have been to probably about 10 shoppers in the Lower Mainland over the last 6 months, and all of them report that they're completely out of Tylenol tablets for children.
Erin Aubrey's daughter recently ended up in hospital with a cough. She was sent home and told to take Tylenol, but they couldn't find any.
Just not having the ability to give that to her as an option was a little bit scary because I just thought, well, we'll just end up back at the hospital and hopefully they have some.
The popularity of the brand and a bad cough and cold season are being blamed.
And we have noticed a significant increase in that sales for those particular products. As a result, yes, we have been ordering on a weekly basis, but we haven't been able to get our full orders on a weekly basis.
In a statement, Tylenol manufacturer Johnson & Johnson said, "We continue to experience increased consumer-driven demand and are taking all possible measures to ensure product availability." At a Toronto pharmacy, Cairo Massa shows how to make liquid Tylenol on site if needed. He says there are plenty alternatives if kids are sick.
There's a lot of pharmacies like myself that can compound this and make it for them if they absolutely need this medication. Another alternative is liquid Advil.
Or you can alter the doses of adult medicine, but he advises to check with a pharmacist first. It's expected the shortage should improve in the summer when cold and flu are less common. Renee Filippone, CBC News, Vancouver.
Nick is back now for our full look at the forecast. It's a bit of a TGIF around here. You know, we're hoping for some sunshine.
I know. Well, you know what? We're going to get it. Actually, we're heading into a stretch of sunshine. That's the good news. It is going to follow a little bit of rainfall tonight, and some of us are already seeing it. Now, this is all being fueled by some of the heat and humidity. Not a ton of heat here, but you did feel the humidex if you went outside. The humidity kind of building throughout the day. We're sitting at 22 degrees right now. With the humidex, though, feels like 27 in the city of Toronto. Similar humidex values and similar temperatures across the region. And what we're watching here is this line of showers and actually thunderstorms that had developed through the afternoon. So in behind some of these rain showers that have passed across the area, we've had some sunshine, and then right down the center here, we've triggered off a little bit in the way of thunderstorm activity. That line has been developing throughout the afternoon, and often this sort of propagates its own self. So what we're seeing is we saw it kind of develop down in southwestern Ontario Ontario, and it's kind of pushing up toward the GTA. Right now, along the north edge of the GTA, kind of pushing toward about the Highway 407 area, but certainly Highway 9 south toward the 407. That's where we're looking at this line at this moment. And it's not a very quick moving system. So areas that are going to get hit by rain, expecting to see some extended periods of rain and thunderstorm activity tonight. I think this whole thing is going to shift south toward the water as the sun begins to set. So look for rain showers in your neighborhood as well as we head toward the later evening hours. It clears out by tomorrow morning. Then we've got sunshine in the forecast for tomorrow. A little bit of high cloud cover, but for the most part, it's just sunny skies through Sunday as well. And we begin to build that humidity once more as we head toward the beginning of next week. For tonight, temperatures still in double digits, about 14 degrees City of Toronto, evening showers and thunderstorms in the forecast. Long range, though, take a look at some of these numbers. So 22 tomorrow, 24 on Sunday. These are pretty close to the seasonal mark, but we start to see the humidity building in Monday and Tuesday up to about 30 degrees, humidex in the mid-30s, and then we get showers and likely some thunderstorms for mid next week as we get a bit of a cool down. Not much, but a bit of a cool down. Shannon.
Okay, so we can take the kids to the splash pad. It's good news.
Yes, and I think they're open now, aren't they?
They're open now.
Yeah, so there you go.
Thanks, Nick.
You bet.
As we head to break, here's a look at where the markets closed today. The TSX closed up by 216 points. The Dow rose by 575 points. The dollar also traded higher at 78.51 cents U.S. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Here at CBC, if you're joining us from Barrie or Peterborough, chances are you may have already heard him. Ramraj Sharvendran is the new host of Ontario Morning. I had a chance to meet him very early this morning. Congrats. Week 1, how does it feel?
I feel like I need to take a minute and reset on sleep because I think I wasn't sleeping because I was so excited / nervous about this week. So I wasn't sleeping as sound as I'm maybe used to sometimes.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to some rest this weekend, but it's been great.
I mean, like many journalists, you've sort of done the tour, right? So you're in northern Manitoba. It was like a one-person operation, and then out in Newfoundland. What about those experiences will you sort of bring to the job here?
I think it's the regional focus, right? So when I was in northern Manitoba, I was based in Thompson. I reached 27 different communities, some only accessible by like an 8-hour train ride, right? And so it was being able to build those connections, because I can't be in 27 places at once, right. Build those relationships and really rely on those communities to trust and also share what's going on with what's happening there. And same thing with Newfoundland. Like I was based in St. John's and we covered a wide region. And so in those regional stories, when you can't be in those communities, those relationships are key.
And what I love about the regional shows too is the connection you have with listeners, because media has shrunk so much. And so there aren't as many stations covering the area. So you are really, a breath of fresh air, a warm voice, but also such a key part for people in the mornings.
Yeah, that relationship when I initially left Ontario was one of the things I learned most about some of the regional spaces and outside urban centers really was around that connection to radio, how essential it can be, how intimate it can be, and how important those relationships are. I grew up loving radio, but my relationship changed when I saw how people were, I guess, consuming radio, for lack of a better word, in other parts of the country. And I think that's really key. Like everyone's relationship to it is different, and really understanding and adapting to that was super important. And I think that's going to be a very similar experience here in this region.
Just thinking about Newfoundland for a minute, because I know you did this really cool series. I watched some of it on YouTube. It's 5 videos. People should watch it because the conversations were lovely, and it was called Newfoundland in Color, and it was talking to people about their lived experience of being a BIPOC member in the community. Can you talk to us just a little bit about that? Because I thought it was really beautifully done.
It was actually just kind of a learning experience for me. I kind of wanted to see some of the diversity that you don't always see when you think of Newfoundland and Labrador. You kind of think of, there's a certain image that gets exported sometimes, and there was so much more culture there that people were wanting to talk about, and I wanted to learn about it. And so I just kind of, started calling up people, talking about their experiences, and I said, you know what, let's meet up and see, and just hit record and see what happens. And some of the experiences people had were sad, but some of them were really exciting. They all had different journeys, but they all loved living there. They all called it home. And once their experiences were out there, and listeners and folks watching it got to see that, they just felt like they were learning something new about their community, even though they've been there for generations. I think it was just it was an honor to do that series.
Yeah, it was a wonderful project. So yes, you've had your time away.
Yeah.
Now you're back home, born and raised in Toronto in Southern Ontario. How does that feel? I'm sure your family is excited to have you back.
It is nice to be back in Ontario. I've missed it. I've been away for about, I think it'll be 4 years this summer. And I'm excited to just kind of do what I love doing in a place that I'm familiar with, in a place that I have community in. My journey up to here has been amazing, and getting to build relationships in those communities and build really homes in different places in the country.
Mm-hmm.
But there is something to be said about coming home.
Thank you so much for talking to us about this. It's super exciting to have you here, and I know everybody's just already enjoying listening already.
Thanks so much, Shannon.
You've probably heard of the AGO or the Royal Ontario Museum, right? But have you ever heard of Spadina Museum? Well, this weekend might be your chance to check it out. The city's annual Doors Open event is back.
This, I think, is a really exciting weekend, and what we're looking forward to being able to do is to give people a taste of Spadina Museum. So you'll be able to come in to explore the first floor, talk to our team and learn more about those different stories, look in the rooms like the drawing room, the kitchen, the billiard room.
So it was home to the Austins, a prominent Toronto family who lived a lavish life in the 20s. It is just one of 100 sites open to the public this weekend for free. And it's the first time the event is taking place since before the pandemic. So for those who want to explore Toronto, you can also do it from the comfort of your own home. There is a virtual option too. So rain or shine, you can check it out.
You certainly can. Actually, we were there for an Easter egg hunt a couple of years ago.
So cool.
Yeah, that's in my old hood. Moved a little bit further away now. But beautiful place to check out. And you know what? We're going to have the weather for it as well. Temperatures are on the rise. Sunshine is moving in, and it's going to stick around for a little while. Let me talk about the temperatures first. Now, we're seeing a little bit of I wouldn't say a dip in the humidity, not so much the temperatures. But as we move through Saturday and into Sunday, you're going to start to see the heat and also the humidity building in, certainly for Monday and for Tuesday for most of Southern Ontario and up to parts of Northern Ontario as well. This hot weather will be in place. It's going to bring with it humidex values that are going to be in the mid-30s or higher, and lots of sunshine to boot. Right now, though, we're still looking at thunder showers across the north end of the GTA. We're seeing that poke down around the Vaughan area right now. One thing you'll notice, though, is it's very slow to move south. So areas that are in the track of these storms seeing sort of long periods of rainfall, and this is slowly going to start to move down as we move through tonight. 14 tonight, clears out 22 for tomorrow, and sunshine continues to next week. Shannon.
That's the kind of forecast we need on a Friday. Thank you so much, Nick.
You bet.
That's our show. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you again here tomorrow night at 6.